All right, and we are live.
Hey, thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Nice to see everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 1:04 p.m.
And friendly reminder when I call roll to please state via Zoom and your location. Kreitner? I don't have him on my screen. Is he on mute?
We saw his name.
Yeah, he was on.
Yeah.
Mhm.
He's muted.
Dale, can you unmute, please?
You might have to tell them how. Some people, it's, what is it, *6?
Yes.
Well, we see that he's there, so we'll come back to him. Meeks?
President via Zoom, Ben Charter Township.
Scott?
Yes, via Zoom, New Buffalo Township.
Smith?
Present via Zoom from St. Joseph City.
Wycamp?
Kathy Wycamp via Zoom, St. Joe.
Wyke?
Good.
Yes, via Zoom, Administration Building, St. Joseph, Michigan.
Yarborough?
Present via Zoom, City of Benton Harbor.
Madam Chair, you have 7 present.
Thank
You
you.
know, I have to correct what I said. I'm sorry. I'm not on Zoom. I'm calling in, so I can't be present on Zoom. So I guess I'm present on the phone.
It's still through Zoom, so we're good.
Okay. Well, okay, you can't see me. Okay.
Okay. The minutes from the February 25th, 2020 meeting that was held. Can we get a motion to approve the minutes, or if there's any changes, approve those changes first?
Commissioner Meeks make that motion for approval.
It wasn't 2021?
2021, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mamie.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Well, okay. Well, that old then. I guess 2021 now.
Commissioner Scott, I'll support that. And fine minutes they were too.
And ready
Thank
for
you.
roll?
Roll call, please.
Kreitner? He's still muted. Meeks?
Yes. Yes.
Scott?
Yes,
Smith?
Yes.
Wycamp?
Yes.
Wyke?
Yes.
Yarborough?
Yes.
You have 6 yeas.
Thank you. Okay, communications for the Michigan Association of Land Bank. Katie, would you like to fill us in?
Yes, if it's possible, if we can just maybe hold that off, and I think you can see on the screen, I've provided a revised agenda so we could move up to the new business and have Dan do a presentation just due to some members' time. I think Kathy has to step off the line or off the meeting. So if we could accept the agenda as presented on your screen, then I can let Dan take over if that's okay. And then we'll begin to I'll follow back up with Michigan Association of Land Bank updates.
That's fine.
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Scott. I'll make a motion to accept the new agenda moving up the Brownfield redevelopment.
I support Mamie Yarbrough. Did you hear me?
Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we'll have Dan Fetty do his presentation in regards to the Brownfield.
All right, thank you, everyone. It's nice to see everyone again. Let me see if I can pull my screen share up here and we'll get moving on this. There we go. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes,
So bear with me 1 second here. There we go. All right. Katie asked me to do a presentation for this board talking about what brownfield redevelopment is, and kind of the interplay between brownfield redevelopment or the powers of the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority and the powers of the Land Bank Authority, because the two are associated within both the Land Bank Act and the Brownfield Act. And we've talked kind of around the issue sometimes about how land bank properties are brownfields and their systems, but I don't think we've ever really gone into any detail about what brownfield redevelopment is and how it would relate to land bank properties. So this is a presentation. It's a very kind of generalized presentation of how brownfields work, and with some suggestions on how we could look at using the brownfield to help the Land Bank Authority moving forward. And for a lot of commissioners, this is going to be repetitive because I think you've all seen this before, but let me just kind of jump right into this. Brownfields are defined as idle or abandoned or underutilized industrial and commercial properties where, you know, the redevelopment is complicated. The redevelopment of those properties would be complicated by real or perceived environmental conditions on the site. They're not, we colloquially refer to all contaminated sites as brownfields. That's not the case. They're not Superfund sites. They're not necessarily always contaminated sites. But it is a kind of a legal term of art created in a variety of statutes in the state of Michigan. So to be eligible for brownfield redevelopment assistance, a property has to have certain identified contamination that exceeds the criteria established by the state of Michigan through legal. Now, those properties are termed facilities and are therefore eligible to be enrolled in a brownfield plan. Now, additionally, properties that are determined to be blighted or functionally obsolete, or properties that are owned or controlled by a land bank authority are also considered to be facilities and therefore are eligible to be enrolled in a brownfield plan. Now, the reason we do brownfield redevelopment projects is because obviously we want to create new tax base or recover lost tax base that may have occurred through blight or deterioration. We would like to see properties used in a manner that creates jobs for the community if possible. Most brownfield properties or facilities tend to be located in urban areas connected to existing municipal infrastructure. So the redevelopment of those sites is important to use for the reuse of existing infrastructure and to avoid the possibility or the likelihood of sprawl, which is a very expensive process to try to put infrastructure into outlying areas. And probably most importantly, we want to see the local environment improve. We want to see sites cleaned up and reused so that the environment is improved. Now, as I mentioned, because of the geography of industrial development in the Midwest, most of these brownfield sites are in urban areas, and their reuse is kind of critical to urban redevelopment. You can think about, you know, we could talk about the Harbor Shores project as a perfect example of 580 acres of contaminated industrial property right in the heart of 3 urban communities. So this is one of the reasons we try to encourage the use of brownfield redevelopment. Oftentimes what we find is that brownfield sites have a number of barriers to redevelopment, costs that make them very, or in some cases, much more expensive to develop than non-contaminated sites. And obviously you have potential remediation costs. You have, you know, issues about environmental liability. For many years, the state of Michigan had environmental laws that said whoever touched the chain of title of a piece of property was equally liable for its contamination, whether or not they were the cause of the contamination. Understandably, a lot of people wouldn't want to buy or become associated or entangled in property that had any kind of concerns of contamination on site. Because of that, banks oftentimes didn't want to finance the purchase and redevelopment of contaminated property either, because they were concerned that their counterparty, their borrower, may turn out to be liable for the contamination through simple inheritance. And oftentimes we find that there's antiquated infrastructure serving those sites too. And although we want to reuse what existing infrastructure we can, we find that some of the infrastructure that's been underutilized deteriorates and requires a great deal of investment to repair. Now, the notion of a brownfield redevelopment project is that we are trying to encourage and assist private developers for paying for the removal of these barriers. This is different than what you think of as a publicly funded environmental cleanup program. We see these all throughout the state of Michigan. You think about, you know, a bursted pipeline or an oil spill within a river, and what we see is the public ends up paying for the cleanup and then trying to seek cost recovery from the liable party. With brownfield redevelopment, we do it differently. We tell private parties, if you want to get involved in redeveloping a brownfield site, we will help finance your redevelopment, or at least offset a portion of the costs associated with that redevelopment. So that the burden, the financial burden, rests with the private industry or private sector, not the public sector. In 1995-96, Michigan adopted a new Environmental Protection Act that contained a provision called Part 201, and this totally changed the way that environmental liability works in the state of Michigan. And what it basically says is that you can cap your liability, or you can apportion liability on a contaminated property to those parties that actually caused the contamination in the first place. If anyone here has ever purchased commercial property, you know that oftentimes your bank will require you to get something called a baseline environmental assessment. This is a document that you have to file with the state of Michigan that essentially says, this property is contaminated, but I didn't cause it, so I'm not liable for it. And if you do that, what ends up happening is that banks feel much more comfortable in lending to you, and you also have the certainty of not being sued for any kind of, liability associated with the contamination of the site. At the same time that Part 201 of Public Act 451 was adopted, the state also adopted the Brownfield Redevelopment Financing Act, which is Public Act 381 of 1996. And that authorizes all units of local government to create brownfield redevelopment authorities that can utilize tax increment financing to help defray or offset certain costs associated with the private redevelopment of contaminated or blighted property. Essentially what happens here is we make two determinations through a brownfield authority. First of all, we look at a property and say, is it an eligible property under the Act? And are the proposed activities that the developer wants to undertake on that property considered to be quote unquote eligible activities under the Act? And if the answer to those two questions are yes, then the Brownfield Authority can propose to use tax increment financing using the increased value of the development and the taxes generated thereof to offset some of the private costs associated with the redevelopment of the property. Eligible properties are categorized as I said, facilities, that is having contamination exceeding certain criteria established by the state, blighted, functionally obsolete, or owned or under control of the land bank authority. So every property this land bank's ever touched is technically a brownfield and eligible for brownfield assessment. Eligible activities for eligible properties are those that are necessary to remove the environmental barriers for redevelopment. Those typically include environmental investigations, response actions like remediation of contaminated soils, due care activities. These are things that you do to ensure that you're not contaminating or exacerbating a condition on site. Oftentimes that involves things like capping contamination on site so that it doesn't come into contact with individuals. Now, in certain communities called core communities, just the designation the state of Michigan makes, eligible activities can also include site preparation and public infrastructure development. In Berrien County, Benton Township, City of Benton Harbor, City of Niles, and City of St. Joe are core communities. So brownfield projects in those communities, not only can we pay for environmental costs associated with redevelopment, we can pay for almost all public infrastructure costs that are associated with those redevelopment sites. And examples of those would be the Harbor Shores project, where most of the cost of the Harbor Shores project is infrastructure. The Index Power Plant project in Niles, which is a Niles Brownfield plan, but it's one that we wrote or helped to write, and it's one that we are administering on behalf of Niles. And that's mostly public infrastructure as well. Ones that the commissioners just saw this morning that they approved is the Harbor Woods housing development, which the majority of the cost there is infrastructure as well. Now, there's a long-winded way of getting to the key point. Under Act 381, any property owned or controlled by a land bank authority is not just eligible for inclusion into a brownfield plan, it is considered to be located within a core community, regardless of the jurisdiction where the property actually is. Okay, so if we owned or controlled a property in, say, St. Joe Township, it would be a brownfield, but it would also be treated as though it were in a core community, and therefore eligible for tax increment financing reimbursement of environmental and infrastructure costs. And this is an odd way of doing this, but the people that wrote Act 381 and the people that actually wrote Act, 256, did this intentionally so that land banks would have expanded powers to redevelop properties in urban areas that weren't necessarily core communities. The method for financing these activities of brownfield redevelopment, as I said, typically it's tax increment financing. The tax is generated by the value that's added to the new project or the property. Those taxes are captured and then remitted to the developer to reimburse those eligible costs. Typically, those would include only local millages, but with the permission of the state of Michigan, through the Michigan Strategic Fund or through Eagle, we could also capture school taxes, the 6 mil state educational tax, or the 18 mil local operating millage tax as well. So for certain projects that meet certain definite criteria, we petition the state to allow us to capture those additional 24 mils as well. And those tend to be the big projects. Harbor Shores is an example of that. The Index Power Plant project is an example of that as well. There are grant and loan programs out there. I will tell you though, the funding on these has become grossly inadequate, and we really haven't been able to access many grant or loan programs in the last 5 or 6 years. The EPA has some that are still viable, but the state of Michigan grant and loan programs tend to be, they're pretty depleted at this point. There's also an opportunity where the county could issue environmental bonds supported by tax increment or anticipated tax increment revenues. We have never done that because tax increment revenues tend to be somewhat speculative. They're based on a developer following through with their development. The last thing we want to do is issue bonds for a development that doesn't go through, and then there's no tip to pay those bonds off. So we've avoided doing that. I'm going to run through this real quick, but to give you an idea how a project would work, a developer would come to us and say, I have this piece of property, I want to redevelop it. It's got a variety of environmental problems. It's got a variety of infrastructure work that needs to be done. These are all public costs. Can the Brownfield Authority write a plan for me that would allow these to be reimbursed? And say, okay, we'll write this plan. We deem the property to be eligible for its environmental condition because it's blighted, because it's owned by a land bank, whatever the case may be, it's eligible to be included. The activities that need to be undertaken, we consider them to be, of public purpose and eligible activities, and we will project out what the tax increment revenues of the property will be upon completion of the development. Brownfield Authority reviews that plan, makes a determination that it meets a public purpose, it satisfies the purposes of Act 381. They pass a resolution recommended the County Board of Commissioners adopt the plan. The plan goes to the county board holds a public hearing and then votes on the adoption of the plan. And then the local community in which the property is located also has to pass a resolution to support the plan. Once that's done, we sign a development agreement with the developer. They undertake the construction of the project. They pay their tax bills, or subsequent owners of the property pay the tax bills. We capture those taxes, and then on an annual basis, as we group them together, we meet with the developer, go through their eligible expenses, their certified eligible expenses, and begin repaying those costs with the TIF, and that it occurs on an annual basis until all of the eligible expenses are paid off. Now, the one thing that I don't have on this slide that's relevant to the land bank is you can imagine a scenario where the land bank could actually take ownership of a piece of property that is slated for redevelopment, but otherwise is ineligible for inclusion in the brownfield. And the land bank could conceivably take an ownership interest in that project through a partnership with a private developer. Through that partnership, then, the property would become, by definition, a brownfield site. We could write a brownfield plan for the tax increment reimbursement of environmental and infrastructure work and offset the developer's public infrastructure and environmental costs of doing so, thereby lowering the overall cost of development. We have not done that, but there are communities that have done that. And the state land bank has done that quite aggressively in certain situations in the east side of the state. So it's something potentially to consider, which would be a partnership between the land bank, private developers, and the Brownfield Authority. Katie and I have looked at a couple possibilities of doing this. None of them have come to fruition at this point, but it is a way that we can really leverage the powers of the Land Bank Authority, its unique definition of properties, along with the powers of the Brownfield Authority. And I know that's a lot to go through, but I will answer any questions I can, and if anything needs to be clarified. And I see Katie keeps texting me on my phone, knock it off and trying to get a presentation here.
Hey, Dan, Ezra, didn't a couple of years ago, didn't we have something like that with the property in Bridgman along the railroad tracks there that for Cornerstone?
We did. What we did there, Ezra, was Cornerstone wanted to take control of this property and market it for industrial redevelopment. They were concerned about having to pay the ongoing tax liability as they held the property. They asked us to take a joint ownership in the property, basically to remove it from the tax rolls temporarily so that there weren't ongoing holding costs associated with it while it was being marketed. That's really the reason we did that. And we did that actually at the request of Lake Township as well, that wanted the property put into some kind of holding situation. Now, so it was not the intention of doing this to create a brownfield redevelopment financing scheme. But if the property is sold to a developer who needs brownfield assistance or tax increment finance assistance, now we're set up to do that if we want to, which I think would be a good thing because there's probably going to be some remediation costs associated with redeveloping the property.
Yeah, I think Mamie and I and Steve remember that but I'm not sure Donnie did or Kathy.
Yeah.
That's the only reason I said that.
We have looked at a couple other large scale development proposals over the last year where
I do remember, Ezra.
in having those fell through, but we're still pursuing, a structure in the same way.
All right, thanks, Dan.
Dan, I would like to ask, this is a what if. I'm hanging around Ezra too much. If I owned a piece of property, my uncle left me this piece of property, it's been just sitting there for years, and I wanted to build one house on that property. And if it was, I guess it would be looked at, or they may can say already that it's contaminated or not. If it was contaminated, could Brownfield dollars be used to make that land right so that I could build on it? Or is this just for businesses and and big deals?
No, the end use of the property is not material. The question is whether or not the property is eligible in its current condition. If it has contamination, it can be included in a brownfield plan, regardless of what the end use will be. And a good example of that would be the one that you guys just approved this morning, the Harbor Woods brownfield plan.
But that's a 40 units.
Yeah, but it's still a residential housing development.
Yes.
Whether it's 1 unit or 40 units, it's all the same.
Right.
So the
Okay,
question is the property eligible to begin with? And if it is, then you can use brownfield tax increment financing to assist with. Remember, it has to be either cleanup costs or public infrastructure. Can't be private development costs are not eligible.
This was farmland, and I can't imagine what my uncle would have used on it, but he was from the 20s.
You'd be surprised what we find on farm.
Whatever he thought would work.
Yeah.
So that's why I wondered if it could be for an individual property.
It could be, but the other consideration in a scenario like that, Mamie, is that we can't really provide brownfield assistance to a party who's liable for causing the contamination in the first place. I mean, there are exceptions, but we tend to avoid
Yeah,
it.
but I would not have, I was trying to make an example, but I would not have used it at all. I just inherited it.
Right, right.
I didn't, I wasn't born yet. Thank you. Oh, I had another question. Did we help the city of Benton Harbor or did we do NOBO? And I don't think we did because you don't have it listed in your other things. Did we do it? Were they brownfield or had it already been cleaned up?
That property, oh boy, there's a long history of that property, but yes, the short answer is yes, it had been cleaned up. It had been cleaned up multiple times, in fact. Our Brownfield Authority was associated with the cleanup in 2004 and 5.
Okay,
And then the EPA actually did a directed cleanup of that site, a publicly funded cleanup of that site in 2012 or 13, I think. So
okay,
we did not offer any kind of brownfield assistance to Noble. And part of the practical reason for that is because it's a marijuana production facility, we were uncertain of whether or not we should offer public financing assistance to a facility of that nature. I think you can understand that we were a little sensitive to that kind of development. If they become more routine, more accepted, maybe we'll look at it differently in the future.
or if the United States makes it legal all over, I keep seeing things about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, there's an issue there too about the ability of these kind of businesses to engage in commercial banking relationships. And
Right, that,
until that's the case, we don't really want to touch them.
okay, all right. Thank you, that's all I wondered.
Well, I know it's a lot of confusing information. It's difficult to work through, but the long and short of it, I don't want to belabor it anymore. The long and short of it is, if it's a land bank property, it's a brownfield. If it's a brownfield, we can use TIF to help defray the costs of redevelopment to the extent that those costs are public in nature. And we should look at opportunities to do this, even if it's only using local taxes. It's a way of motivating some redevelopment of these properties.
Ian, could you forward your presentation
Yeah, absolutely.
to the group
Yep.
for
Absolutely.
reference? Thank you.
Yeah, as soon as we're done today, I'll do that.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, everyone.
Dan, just as a note, if I could ask you to do me one other favor, instead of forwarding that just to the land bank, would you also forward it to all the county commissioners? Because we have 2 new county commissioners,
Oh, yeah.
and they may not be aware of everything and how this works.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was an issue this morning. We were trying to do the public hearing because I was concerned that a couple of the commissioners may not have the background understanding of what we're doing. But yeah, I'll absolutely do that. I'll forward that.
Yeah.
I'll give it to Annette and she can distribute it to everyone.
Right, because this is a very, very good, simple explanation for brownfields.
Yeah.
Great.
It's a
Okay,
good-
I'll absolutely do that then. Yep.
I have a quick question. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Kathy.
What do you see as targeted partners or sites that land bank could pursue using these kind of mechanisms? It seems like a partnership made in heaven.
Well, I think what we want to look at, remember, the idea is to redeploy or reutilize underutilized urban property. I think the first course of action will be to look at large tracts of urban property whose redevelopment will spur additional growth in the area. What we don't want to do is use these techniques to artificially create a brownfield status on a green field that really isn't intended for redevelopment. I mean, that it's the long way of saying the focus is redevelopment and not development of undeveloped properties. That's the one way I would look at it. We'd want to focus on property that already is served by municipal infrastructure for obvious cost reasons. We don't want to encourage or induce any kind of sprawl. Properties where we have known environmental contamination would be best. But I can think of just off the top of my head, I think a handful of properties in the Benton Harbor St. Joe area that we know have remained vacant for a while that would be, it would be a great benefit if we could induce some kind of redevelopment on those sites. I know that, the former Mercy Hospital site would be a great example of that.
Exactly.
So I don't know specifically which properties to look at other than a handful of them, but generally speaking, I think the focus should be on the urban properties that are depleted, underutilized, blighted, or have contamination. They have existing infrastructure and where we have a reasonable expectation that the redevelopment would cause additional tax growth in the surrounding area.
Is there any way that we could, this is probably not the right framing, but sort of market those opportunities through Cornerstone or something, just to have them not just in our heads, but sort of put them out as possibilities to the development community?
We kind of do that already. You're probably aware the arrangement between the county and Cornerstone is that Cornerstone is kind of the marketing wing of economic development in Berrien County. The county itself doesn't do a lot of that. So we provide this information to Cornerstone, and when they reach out to developers, they inform them of the opportunities for tax increment financing, for infrastructure, site remediation, demolition, site preparation, and so forth. We haven't gotten, the game. I mean, getting outside developers to come into a community and do large scale redevelopment is not an easy thing. We get about one every 2 or 3 years. It really is a big deal. But when those happen, I think we can be a little more aggressive in pushing the option of utilizing the land bank to assist with those, particularly if it's redevelopment of property that's not already in a core community, because that's where the land bank ownership status becomes so vital.
Yeah.
Without saying too much because some of it's confidential, we have been involved over the last 18 months with a possible development in a community that's not a core community. And that development will require substantial infrastructure work to support it. So one of the things we've talked about with the developer is potentially entering into an actual ownership partnership agreement where the land bank would take, through a variety of indemnification agreements, the land bank would take a fractional ownership of the property, thereby making it eligible for inclusion in the Brownfield plan and making it a core community and eligible for infrastructure TIF repayment. To make it work, it's going to be very complicated legally, but that's the kind of thing we'd be looking at, because then you're really like leveraging the power of Brownfield and the private investor.
Great. That's good to hear that we're looking for ways to use that benefit. Yep. Great. Thanks, Dan.
Sure.
May I ask, Dan, what I was thinking about, can it be more than, when I think about brownfield, I think about what's in the ground, but can it be lead and asbestos and the lead pipes? And can it be more, when you say infrastructure, can it be more than just what's been put in the ground, the mercury and arsenic and stuff?
Yeah, well, once a property is deemed to be eligible, yes, things like if you have to do lead and asbestos remediation, that's eligible to be reimbursed. Demolition is eligible for reimbursement.
Okay.
It's pretty tough to qualify a property as a brownfield when the only contaminants that exist are lead and asbestos. You generally have to have something a little more severe than that on site. But again, if we're talking about the land bank being involved, we bypass that problem altogether, because any property owned or controlled by a land bank is automatically a brownfield, regardless of contamination.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there are some large buildings. I'm not, I'm not doing my one example, but I think a lot of places through our Downtown Development Authority were made brownfields in the city of Benton Harbor.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I don't want to get too technical, but there's a trick that can be used for that as well, which is if you get one parcel that you know is contaminated, then the parcel next to it is also considered a brownfield.
Okay.
So now you have parcel 1 and parcel 2, they're brownfields. Well, now you have parcel next to that, parcel 3, that's a brownfield because it's adjacent, and you just keep building it out further and further. Harbor Shores was done by that method. Of the entire 580 acres in Harbor Shores, only a handful of parcels had known contamination on.
Okay.
But because one was adjacent to the next and the next and the next, we built out the whole project. So there's some little tricks you can use.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate everyone's time. I know that was a little bit longer than I expected it to be, but it can be a complicated process. I will email the presentation to all the members. I'll send it to Annette so that the Board of Commissioners has it as well. But this is something that, as we go looking for things to do with the land bank, this is an opportunity that's worth exploring, I think.
Okay.
Thank you, Dan, for the information in your presentation. Much appreciated.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to hop off.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on, Katie, would you like to talk about the Michigan Association of Land Bank? What's happening there?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. The Michigan Association of Land Banks, they just had a meeting this past week, and as far as on the national side of things, I can report on the Restoring Communities Left Behind Act. I think I presented that last in our February meeting. That's HR 816. And that there has been some discussion at the national level of it possibly being included in the infrastructure act, the infrastructure bill that's being presented. Nothing is finite, nothing is secured as far as that, but it has been discussed as an option. Along with the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, that's Senate 98. Senate Bill 98, and that provides a lot of opportunities for a lot to do with gap financing, and particularly with appraisal gaps and development costs for acquiring, rehabbing, and selling. Then there's always that gap between what it costs and what it's sold. And also making it attainable, not necessarily affordable, but attainable housing, with an emphasis on workforce housing as well. That has had a little more interest in conversations with being included in the infrastructure bill. So, it's going to be several months yet before that's introduced, but there is that one's, the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act seems to be more getting a better push to be included in the infrastructure bill. As far as other activities nationally, that's pretty much it from the national side. On the state side, I think we also discussed the possible introduction of legislation to modify the property tax foreclosure in a way for land banks to try to access more resources for operating, to have being able to provide some sustainability in the operation side of land bank expenses. And due to the recent updated tax foreclosure amendments that were approved in December last year, December last year, it doesn't look like there's any movement, or now is not necessarily the opportunity to consider making those changes. However, it might be later in this year that it could be introduced, just to kind of get it in front of people's eyes for consideration. And this is where we were, I would describe the way that the amended change was not increasing any collection of dollars or penalties or fees, but getting it a year earlier. So breaking out, there's $175 that's collected on a property that goes into tax delinquency and then forfeiture and foreclosure. And all of that funding is typically, or that fee is billed in year 2. And the proposed legislation is to break that into 2 parts. Year 1, charge $100, and year 2, $75. Am I saying this right, Shelley, on the dollar amounts?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, 175.
Yeah. And so if in fact the property owner redeems pays up their delinquencies and redeems before the foreclosure, then and within that year, before year 2 is over, then that $100 would be collected and passed on to the land bank. If the property doesn't get redeemed or paid up, then all of those funds would still just, as it has been, stays with the treasurer's office for processing and maintaining the foreclosure process. So it was a way for, it was a way for utilizing the tax foreclosure process as a way to also support land bank activities, since they kind of, majority of the properties that are in land banks are foreclosed, and most properties from the treasurer that doesn't get sold or conveyed end up going to the land bank. So it's, kind of the spot where all the properties end up. For us, for the sake of Berrien County, we've been fortunate that a lot of our properties have sold during the auctions and haven't had to have extreme excess amounts of properties coming to us. That doesn't mean that can't happen, but in other communities throughout other land banks throughout the state have, significant numbers of properties that they're overseeing and managing. So it is something that's individual as well as a statewide concern, just as far as how to keep sustainability, and also with some of the projects and reworkings of where we want to be best utilized as a land bank, and utilizing the tools that we have. This is where that's at. So at the current time, nothing's happening as far as the state, any changes in state land bank resources. And that's pretty much. There was also discussion, there's been some, as Dan presented about the Brownfield redevelopment, there's been some changes, or it's been their policy ongoing with the Michigan Strategic Fund, but they just put it in writing as kind of their guidelines for how to have land bank projects being able to utilize the Brownfield capture at the state level, applying for the MSF state capture TIF. So there's been some changes, and there's still discussions with how that's moving forward. And that's all I have to report about the Association of Land Banks.
All right, thank you, Katie. Thank you for those updates, and I know you'll continue to keep us posted on those.
Yes.
Do we have any public comment?
I am not showing any.
Nothing? Okay. All right. We can now move on to the budget.
All right. Here. I will just, I think in your earlier today, you received the budgets from Kim Fedison had forwarded that to you, but I just shared the screen showing our statement. And we don't have a lot of expense activities this month. However, we did get some more tax collection of our 550. And so our cash and investments as of today is $488,690.75. And if I scroll to this and hit this little button, and here you can see just our balance sheet for the end of today, as of now, and just kind of showing, and then also just showing where our budget is as far as I didn't anticipate getting all the revenue, so I'm a little off on my budget, but which is a good thing. I like having proposed less and getting more. So just a modification that needs to probably be adjusted for next year's budget for anticipation. So that this is your budget report. If anybody has any questions.
I do have a question, Mamie Yarbrough. Katie, when you say taxes, is some of that taxes from the NOBO? has it, I don't know if it's time to have paid them, but I see 7,000 something. Is that from all the different properties that we sold or that we have?
Yes, that's exactly, it's, so each municipality that has properties that have, within that 5-year period. So when we sell a parcel, to a property owner, there is, for 5 years after the sale of that property, we're able to collect 50% of the taxable value, valuation. And so, at the time of settlement each year, many of the townships and municipalities in general will settle with the treasurer and then also disperse all of the taxing units.
Could it be little bits of money? This is what I
Yeah.
think about, like, what would NSP, neighborhood? You know, we sold places for $250. We sold
Yes.
for $50. Do we get any of that?
So, yeah, so typically on a vacant parcel that, a residential vacant parcel, the ones we sold for typically $250, sometimes a little bit less as the later years of NSP. Those sometimes we might get $7, sometimes we might get $15 or $25
Okay.
for the taxes on that. Then there's also some of the larger parcels such as Nobo. There's a couple, if you recall, we've received some properties from actual bank foreclosures, like the real estate owned parcels, like from Bank of America or
The cowboy one, what is it? I can't think what it is, but it was, I say Cowboys. What used to deliver the mail? Wells Fargo.
yeah, Wells Fargo, that's right. Wells Fargo, we did receive a couple vacant, foreclosed residential structures where we had sold those. And in most cases, they were remodeled by the private buyer.
Oh.
And so then they have a little more value that we get to collect for those 5 years. So it ranges, each municipality is a little different.
Thank you.
Yes.
Because I remember when we didn't have any money.
I know.
Okay, can we get a motion to approve the financial statements?
So moved by Commissioner Scott.
Steve Smith, I'll second.
Thank you. Okay, any old business that we need to address?
I'm sorry,
Chair,
Shelley, I need to take a roll call.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We'll call that.
And I'm assuming Kreitner is still not able to unmute. Meeks? Oh, he left. Did he? It looks like he left. Scott?
Yes.
Smith?
Yes.
Wycamp has left. Wyke?
Yes.
Yarbrough.
Yes.
We have 4 yays.
Thank you. Now for old business. Do we have anything to discuss there?
I have one thing I'd like to ask, because I'm not sure. When we vote on things on the land bank, do we have to have a majority of members of the land bank present in order to vote? Like, what I'm saying is, we did earlier, but we lost Kreitner, we lost Meeks, we lost Kathy. So we had a quorum to do the meeting, but what about as people leave and then we go to approve certain things? Is it just a majority of the people present? I don't know. That's a question I'm not sure of.
Well, I believe we still have a quorum present right now. So as long as I understand, and I'm not an attorney by no means, as long as we have a majority vote approving with a quorum present. I'd have to look back to our bylaws to see how it's specifically worded, and I can do that and respond to you or respond to everyone in an email.
Right. The reason I ask that is because in this day and age that people have a lot of things that are going on and a lot of meetings and other Zoom meetings and that, if we find out that we definitely need X amount of votes or whatever on things like that, that maybe we should move certain things up in the agenda to get all of that stuff approved prior to losing members. You know what I'm saying? I'm not sure what the bylaws say. So if somebody could check that, I would appreciate that. I just want to make sure
Yeah.
we're doing everything in the right way.
May I ask Attorney Stephen Smith, do you have any thought about this?
I would have to take a look at the bylaws because it's, I mean, I certainly know the quorum, but there's a good question because some bylaws will say a majority of those in attendance if there's a quorum, and some will say a majority of the board as comprised. So that would be an interesting question to take a look at. But
And it may not say anything. And Berrien County does not follow Robert's Rules of Order.
Right.
We use that when we want to. We don't use Roberts.
Yeah.
So
I didn't mean to throw a monkey wrench into everything. I just thought I would ask the question.
That's a good question.
Just so we know, you know.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Can I ask, what is the number for the quorum?
4.
How many members do we have? 7?
We have 7 members, so we just need 4 for a quorum.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
We were all here.
And technically Dale's here. He's just not able to unmute himself.
Okay.
So Dale, if you can, *6 is what will unmute you if you want to try it on your phone. *6.
I don't know if he's on the, is that he's on the phone or on the, oh, I see what you mean. He's in Zoom, but he's on his phone in it.
Oh, well. So I will look at the bylaws and I'll respond to you all by email as to what is the proper method. And if it's something that needs to be modified, we can certainly look at that at next month's meeting.
And
Or
one
next
other
meeting.
thing for Jennifer, where there was a motion made and it was supported earlier to amend the agenda, and we never did take a roll call vote on that. If we need to, maybe we should. If we don't, then just tell me to shut up and we'll move right on.
It's my understanding with the agenda change that can be authorized just by the chairperson. So a motion wasn't needed.
Most excellent. Most excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay, any more old business or something else that someone wants to ask? All right, we've already covered the new business with Dan Fetty's presentation earlier. We do appreciate that. And with that being said, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'd make that motion to adjourn, but with a question. Jennifer, how is your son doing?
He is on his second deployment. It was a back-to-back. So I'll get him back in a couple months.
I think about him all the time because of the conversation you and I had upstairs about Mom, you know, when he first deployed, they wouldn't let you know where he was at. I always think about him whenever I see military personnel on the television. I always think of you, so I always have to ask that.
Well, it was just shared on Facebook that they were coordinating with Japan right now, doing some exercises out in the sea.
Oh, that's something.
Excellent, excellent.
Praying well. Could you, excuse me, in the middle of your motion, could you tell me when you think we would meet again? What's normal? The fourth or the third Thursday or the fourth Thursday?
We always meet on the fourth Thursday. And we moved the time from 2 o'clock to 1 o'clock.
Okay. That worked good today because it was about 12 when we got through, wasn't it, Ezra?
Yeah, it was.
Donnie?
Ran a little long today. Of course, we had 2 presentations too.
Yeah, fourth Thursday. Okay. Thank you. Continue.
Anything else? All right, motion to adjourn now.
I will make
I'll
that.
make that motion. I was able to get on now.
Okay.
I'll defer to Donnie. I'll support Donnie's motion to adjourn.
Well, thank you, Ezra.
Thank you all. There he is.
All right,
All
Kreitner,
right.
still muted. Meeks? You're muted.
Yes.
Scott,
Absolutely, yes.
Smith,
Yes.
White,
Yes.
Yarbrough.
Yes.
We have 5 yeas to adjourn.
Thank you much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Land Bank staff. Thank you so much,
Uh-huh.
Treasurer White. It's great to
Thanks, everyone.